Hello everyone, this video is on trigonometric functions and we're going to be looking at the sine, cosine and tangent curves. So I'm going to start with the sine and cosine. The curves of these two are the same shape. They have the same height, both functions have a maximum value of 1 and a minimum value of -1. The only thing that's different is the cosine curve is translated pi on 2 horizontally to the right. So what that means is if we were to look at the y-intercept, for a sine curve, the y-intercept is at the origin. For a cosine curve, the y-intercept is at 1. Both functions complete one wavelength in 2 pi radians. The functions are periodic, so they just carry on repeating itself. Now, for the curves y equals a sine bx and y equals a cos bx, a is the amplitude. The period is 2 pi on b. Now the amplitude is half the total height of the graph, so if you've got the graph drawn, you just look at half the total height. So some people like to do the maximum plus the minimum divided by 2. Period is the length of one full cycle, and in our function, you found it by doing 2 pi on b. If there's a negative in front of the function, it's a reflection in the x-axis. If it's a negative in front of the x, a reflection in the y-axis. If there's a minus c or a plus c after the x, then it translates horizontally, and if there's a plus or minus value at the end of the function, it will translate vertically, which we already know from our transformations. So we have then the general cosine function or sine function. So it's y equals a sine in brackets b, brackets x minus c, close your brackets, and then plus d. Just to clarify, a is your amplitude, your maximum minus your minimum divided by 2. Your period equals 2 pi on b, c is a horizontal shift, and d is a vertical shift. First example, sketch the graph of y equals 3 cos 2x between 0 and 2 pi. Okay, so here's some axes. Now we're going to sketch this. So a 3 at the front here is our a. So a equals 3, which means the amplitude is 3. So it is going to a height of 3 and -3. The 2 in front of the x is our b. So we can use this to work out the period. So the period equals 2 pi on b, which would be 2 pi on 2. So our period is pi. So it's going to take pi to do one full circle. Now we don't have any shifts because there's no values added or subtracted. So it's a cosine graph, which means we are going to start on our y-axis. And we're going to start at intercept. Now, because the amplitude is 3, it means our maximum point will be 3, so that's where a cosine graph starts. Because the period is pi, it means it's going to stop at that point too. And because our domain that we're wanting to sketch is between 0 and 2 pi, it means it's going to do 2 full cycles, so it will then end at 2 pi also. This also then means the minimum is going to be halfway between those points at -3. Then once we've got that information, we can then sketch the curve. So remember, a sketch doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be roughly correct. So as long as your minimums are roughly correct, you're on with the right start, and depending on the other information, there may be other points you need to identify. And that's it. Example 2, write down the period and amplitude and find the equation of this function. So let's start with the amplitude. So the amplitude is the distance between the top and the middle of the graph. So if you see here, this is looking to be pretty symmetrical about the x-axis. So our amplitude is that difference between the x-axis and the minimum or the maximum. So if you look there, you'll see it's exactly halfway between 0.4 and 0.6, so it would be 0.5. The other way to work it out is your maximum, which is 0.5, minus your minimum, divided by 2, which would also give you 0.5. Now the period is how long it takes to do one full cycle. So if we start in here at the origin, it does one full cycle and ends at the origin here. Then it does another full cycle and ends there, and another full cycle ends here. So you can see there within 2 pi, it is doing 3 full cycles. It's doing 1 full cycle from here to here, the next one from here to here, and the last one from there to there. So over 2 pi it's doing 3 full cycles, which means the period will be 2 pi over 3. Now to write the equation of the function, so the first thing, it's starting at the origin, which means it's a sine graph. So we know it's going to be a sine. We've worked out the amplitude is 0.5, so it'd be 0.5 sine. The graph doesn't appear to have translated, like they're shifted horizontally or vertically, so there are going to be no values added, which means we're now looking for what value is going to go in front of our x. Now remember here, this period, 2 pi on 3, is your 2 pi on b. So that means the b is 3, so it'll be 0.5 sine 3x. Example 3, sketch the graph of y equals 2 sine 3 multiplied by x plus pi, and then all minus 1 between 0 and 2 pi. So first of all, let's identify everything. So the amplitude equals 2. The period, how long it takes to do one curve, is 2 pi on b. So it's going to be 2 pi on b, which is 2 pi on 3. We're looking at the horizontal shift. So the number added or subtracted from the x is plus pi, which means the horizontal shift will be minus pi, which means it'll move to the left. And the vertical shift is minus 1, so it's going to move down by 1. So now we can draw our graph. Now, as our domain in the question says between 0 and 2 pi, I've made sure I've got that on my graph. And that means we have to start the graph at 0 and end it at 2 pi. The period is 2 pi on 3. So we know it takes 2 pi on 3 to do one full rotation. Remember, the full rotation is an up, down, and back to the beginning. So if there was no shifts or anything, it would go, one would go from there to there, one from there to there, and one from there to there. Now there is a horizontal shift of minus pi, which means all of those points are going to move 3 points to the left. So our first point, the point at 2 pi, is going to move to pi. The point just after pi will move 3 across there. The point between 0 and pi would actually go to it, this one here. And as you can see, then there'd be a point that would be after 2 pi that would move to there, to that purple dot. So now our graph has to do one full cycle between each of the purple dots that are on the x-axis. Now the other thing to note is the amplitude. The amplitude here is 2. If there was no shifts, it would mean our maximum will be at 2 and our minimum will be at negative 2. Because there is a vertical shift of negative 1, that will move down so by 1, so our maximum will be at 1 and our minimum will be at negative 3. So with knowing that, we can then start to draw the graph like this. Go up to negative 1, it needs to go down to here, back up, up, and it's got to carry on going. So we need to start at the x-axis. Our domain is between 0 and 2 pi, so we can't actually join this bit here that I'm just doing right now. We have to start on the y-axis. We know it's got to cross at that first purple dot, it's got to go up to 1 and it will go down. It's got to carry on that shape. That's the first period. And it will look something like that. This just takes practice. When you do questions to practice, it will become a bit more second nature. But they are all the things that you do need to look for. Okay, and then the last thing, just quickly, tangent curves. So the graph of the graph of tan x, it looks like this. I've got a picture here for you. It is periodic, it carries on going forever. There are vertical asymptotes where the function does not exist. And there is no amplitude because the graph's carrying on going up towards infinity and negative infinity. And that is the end of trigonometric functions.